Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rick Samans, Managing Director here at the World Economic Forum, and I do welcome you to this closing plenary session. Being here in the Jordan Valley this week, I think reinforces for many of us that we're living at a truly pivotal moment in history, both for the region and the world. There are huge risks and perhaps even larger opportunities that lay before us that became even clearer, I think, this week. The world economy is in full structural transformation currently, and this region knows it can no longer rely on high energy prices and inflated and rising asset prices for growth. On the political side, I think there's a palpable sense that we've reached a critical junction on the Israel-Palestine question, and indeed on the Western and Arab relations with Iran. Suffice it to say that important decisions are looming that will affect us for years to come. This closing plenary provides us with a chance to reflect a bit on what we heard here this week and to discern what clues we detected that might provide some deeper understanding of the future course of the economy and the political environment in the region. We're very privileged to have this discussion with a distinguished panel of co-chairs of this World Economic Forum Summit on the Middle East. Samir Brikho, who's the CEO of Amec, Kevin Kelly, CEO of Heidrick and Struggles, and Marwan Muasher, who's Senior Vice President for External Affairs of the World Bank, and also serves, we're grateful, as the chair of the Forum's Global Agenda Council on the Middle East. I'd like to start with a question to you, Mr. Brikho. Based on what you heard here this week, what strike you as some of the most critical variables that will determine the future course of the region's economy? What should we be looking for if we're trying to get an understanding of the likelihood that the region will shift to a stronger long-term economic trajectory?
Thank you very much, Rick. I would like to give you my feeling and also the results of the teamwork which we have been doing in the last 3 days. It's very clear that this summit has been a great summit. There's been a great level of engagement, interactions, a lot of good ideas has been generated and good debates. There are a lot of ideas which we have generated, but I would like to focus today in two major areas which I think are very critical for the region. One being the energy issues in the Middle East, and the second one, which is also related to the first issue, the skills and the youth of the Middle East. When you speak about energy, if you take a look on the IEA report, I just would like to share with you some of the data. You'll be seeing that the annual demand growth rate for the Middle East is at 3.2%. This is to be compared with a global average about 1.6% and the OECD average of some 0.5%. Now, what does it tell us? It tells us that if we continue with the demographic changes which we have, and if we continue with the same level of demand, we'll be having a CO2 emissions of a 3% growth on an annual basis. That will be compared with India of 4.1% and with China of 3.1%. And this is alarming in a way. And there is a number of other issues and other drivers like security and also freeing up actually for export of the oil and gas products. There is a number of issues which we need to deal with. Climate change is a major issue. And we will be discussing this in the Middle East also. What does it mean, the climate change, and what could we do? The result of the work is a big board. I cannot take the big board with me, but it's very clear one of the first main tasks which we need to do is that we need to go for conservation, because conservation is going to maybe cut 10 to 20% of the consumption which we have today. The second one is energy efficiency. The third one is grid connections and smart grids. Now, we also discussed about alternative energy sources and how is that going to be work in the region. and what could be, let's say, the different possibilities and the different options. And one of the options which we have been looking on is the nuclear option. And we all know it has some pros and it has some cons. It is covering the base load, it has a low carbon, and it is sustainable. And what is good with it, because it could actually work with the production of water, because as we are moving on the desalination, we need to have a lot of energy. And we do know that there are a number of issues there which we need to tackle when it comes to safety, when it comes also to waste, proliferation, funding, policies, but more important is skills. But what was exciting of the group work is the finding about solar, whether it is solar PV or whether it is solar thermal. Everybody was excited because this region is rich of sun and rich of sand. And that's a good base for actually for the future development. There are no breakthrough technologies yet. We have a system which is working, but it's still at a high cost and also at a low efficiencies. And that's something which the region can actually take the lead on and make a breakthrough. But in order to do that, we need also to invest in an R&D infrastructure. Today, if you have a patent in the Middle East, it's very difficult actually to register this patent in the Middle East and move on. But that leads me now to the second question about the youth in the Middle East. We have been hearing about more than 60% are less than 25 years old. We have an obligation. We have an obligation for our youth, not only to provide them with electricity and water, but what are we going to do on give them an education, access to education at grassroots? What are we doing actually to be able to identify the talents, developing the talents, retaining the talents, and attract maybe talents into the region? It's a major issues. What are about the model roles, and what are the role models which we have for the youth here, which they can copy and they can identify themselves with it? So these are some of the, I call it takeaways, which the group work has been working on.
Thank you very much. Kevin Kelly, let's pick up on this question about youth. Your firm is a leader in human capital development and leadership. What have you picked up here this week regarding how leaders might grapple with this challenge of more fully capitalizing on the latent human potential that exists here in the region?
Sure. Actually, let me just bring out this poster so everyone can see it quickly. Samir had touched on this, and I think one of the questions that we were trying to get answered over the last couple of days was, what do we do to harness the power of the 65% of this region's youth who are under age 25? This to my left is what a collection of youth from this region put together, and this is Jude. Now, Jude is a role model, and we were trying to figure out what the role model of the future looks like. We all had role models growing up, be they athletes, be they Superman, be they professors in school. But what are the role models that the youth in this region could look up to, not just here, but across the globe? They came up with Jude because Jude is a name that could be used for either a female or a male. Jude, they said, is not a perfect role model because the youth in this region believe that by making mistakes, it offers us a great opportunity to learn. And I think one of the other things that was striking is they said that we spend a lot of time in this region using the left part of our brain, which is driven by emotion. How can we start using the right side of our brain, which is the logical side? So I think that we can learn a lot from these youths, but now the onus is on us as leaders today to make this role model come alive. And one of the only ways we can do that is through courage and leadership. Because without courageous leadership, without inspirational leadership, you don't generate or cultivate a future generation of leaders. And when leaders are afraid to actually lead and make bold decisions, then generations suffer. So I think we have a lot to learn. And what I took away from this, and Samir touched upon some other things, are, we have a powerful tool, and that tool is to help the next generation coming through.
Thanks. Marwan, Muasher, let's talk for a moment about the growth outlook here in the region. As I mentioned briefly at the outset, the landscape has shifted not only in the world economically, but also here in the region, with energy prices at a more moderate level and with the financial sector now contending with many, many challenges. Did you detect here this week a more serious commitment toward some of the structural and institutional reforms that you've been advocating for some time, among others here, that are necessary to try to shift the economy here onto a more robust economic trajectory? Are you more or less optimistic about the prospect for these kinds of reforms than when you came?
It's ironic that we're holding this conference in the context of the global financial crisis. And I say it's ironic because the Arab region has probably been one of the least affected by the global financial crisis. Why? Because it is weakly linked with the global economy. But that is not a cause for celebration, as some people want us to believe. The impediments to growth in this region go far beyond the global financial crisis, which might be with us for 2-3 years at best, at worst. There are two impediments to growth that have been talked about in this particular session. One, of course, is the chronic problem of the Arab-Israeli conflict. I don't want to say much about it because it has been said. There are hopeful signs, of course, that there might be serious moves to affect a two-state solution. There is a new U.S. administration with a new resolve, hopefully. The proof remains in the pudding. What I did detect here is a growing frustration with the development model that the region is pursuing so far. It is a development model that we can no longer hide from the rest of the world. If we look at the Arab region, if you look at almost every major index of development, whether it pertains to unemployment, we have doubled the unemployment average of the world. Whether it pertains to the use of the internet, whether it pertains to the freedom of the press, whether it pertains to good governance. If you look at all these indices, we are near or at the bottom of every other region of the world. And I think I've detected a growing frustration with this and a need to do things differently and to take responsibility for some of our own problems other than the Arab-Israeli conflict. The fact remains, as Samir said, is that 70% of the people in the Arab world are under 30 years of age. We have a huge youth bulge with huge numbers of people entering the workforce without the skills that are needed for a global economy. Where we could maybe compete 20 or 30 years ago, we can no longer compete in the global economy. And unless we revisit such issues as education, not in quantity but in quality, in teaching people how to critically think, in teaching people that truths are not absolute, in teaching people how to question, how to do research, in teaching people the basic skills that are needed for innovation, for true change, this region will not hope to rise much above the level of development that it is at been so far. I am hopeful that I saw a lot of discussion about it here. I saw many sessions that talked about free-thinking education, that talked about a new science architecture. But we must go beyond talking to seriously not just revisiting the model, but in actually putting ourselves on a course that would gradually but seriously result in a much better development and more growth than what we have seen so far.
Thanks. I know that there's been a lot of diagnosis about this set of issues for many years, so I'm heartened to hear that you think that we're seeing some shift and movement toward greater commitment. But maybe because we do seem to be at an inflection point here, both on the economic and political side in the region, one common theme I happen to hear emerging from various discussions here, both public and private this week, is the leadership quotient, that dimension. The need for greater and often more imaginative leadership to try to break the Gordian knot of the status quo in some of these areas. Whether it's the challenge of bringing along the Arab and Israeli street on the journey to compromise and peace, or whether it's bringing elites and vested interests along on the journey to effective domestic political and economic reform, or whether in fact it's inside a business organization bringing the workforce and stakeholders along on the journey to needed adaptations of the business model. What you heard this week, I found, is as you suggested, some degree of frustration and a yearning for some imaginative and greater leadership. So in our last few minutes on this panel, I guess I would invite any of you to comment or reflect upon how leaders of all of these stakeholders might seize the moment, seize this pivotal moment in history to try to make that leap into more imaginative leadership.
Sure.
Kevin?
Sure, I'll volunteer to go first. I mentioned this, I think, in the opening session, and a lot of it comes down to, as I mentioned before, both being bold and courageous. And many times we get bogged down in indecision, and I touched upon the fact that the best thing you can do is the right thing, the second best thing is the wrong thing, and the worst thing you can do is nothing at all. And I think we've gotten to a point in time in many leadership situations where it's not only a financial crisis that's affected us, but also a leadership crisis. And it's not only pertinent in this region, but across the globe. So I think we're at a point in time where we have thousands of years of history in this region to learn from, but now how do we focus on going forward? And it's the true task of a leader to set a clear path forward and be courageous and make bold decisions. And I think that's what's one of the takeaways from this meeting.
Let me say, I look at leadership as doing two things. First, as acknowledging facts that can no longer be hidden. The statistical evidence is there for everybody to see. And second, not just acknowledging these facts, but doing something about it in a sustainable and serious manner, to put rhetoric aside and put all ourselves on a development model that works. Other regions in the world have done so. There is no reason whatsoever why this region cannot do it. We have the resources, both human and financial. There is no reason why we cannot do what other regions have been doing more successfully.
Brikho?
I would like to echo also what Marwan has been saying, and Kevin also before. We're not living in denial anymore, and I think this is a big change which we have been having in the past. And I think in leadership, we have been lacking, let's say, leadership in many of the topics and issues in the world. And this is now the time for us to do that. And I think this is a great opportunity. And if I think about it, actually it should be like this. It should be a precondition for every participant who participate in the WEF, is that he needs to undertake 2 actions. When he goes back home, he says, what are the 2 actions which you, every one of you, is going to take in order to make the world a better world? Because if we don't do that, we're losing an opportunity here.
Thank you. I think that's a good place to leave the discussion. I want to thank our co-chairs for their participation in this conversation, and thank all of you for staying in your seats as we change over the stage for the closing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.